Hey guys, it's Austin Blankenship coming at you with Rack City MTG again. And I just wanted to talk for a minute about why you're seeing a little bit less rack content than anticipated right now. And a big part of that is honestly, Modern's not been the most fun with me as far as like how the online meta is right now. I've enjoyed the paper meta quite a bit still. Uh, people, but there's such a discrepancy of basically you see either Ragavan decks or Hammer Time decks, and a lot of in this video there's a lot of fun stuff in between, or at least two fun stuff in between. And coincidentally, those were the two matches we won pretty easily. But there's been a lot. It's been very difficult to run this deck online, even while tuning it to the online meta. The specifically the card Ragavan itself has caused such swingy gameplay for Rack that I'm still trying to figure out a way to make Rack playable on the online meta, and so much so beating my head against the wall with it that it's been pretty nearly impossible to beat consistently, even going up to now 7 1 mana removal spells for their 1 mana creature. The fact that Ragavan has dash specifically has been something that, very hard for us to play around with their edicts and things like that. And it's just not a very fun magic card for me personally to play against. I recorded this whole league and I recorded audio for this league. Unfortunately, where it's been so long since I've recorded a league, I recorded 2 leagues today without playing or without having my microphone on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through. I'm going to show you some of the games that we've won, show you some of the highlights of the rack, and then I'm going to show you a couple of games as to why I think that I've been playing other formats. For I've been playing a little bit more Pauper again, a little more Legacy again. Been playing Modern still with my friends and like at our local LGS and things like that because the meta is not as volatile and as consistently the tier 1 decks as online tends to be, but it's not even so much that the cards I'm playing against are overpowered. I think that you could do okay with a rack deck at a major SCG event. I think that you could do just fine. I think that it's just as powerful as any other deck that isn't specifically a Ragavan mid-range deck or a Hammer Time deck. Those two decks, specifically the card advantage that Ragavan and Esper Sentinel consistently give those types of decks, make it hard for our deck to, and Pure Steel Paladin and a couple other really value-y, grindy cards, make it hard to play a fair game of Magic unless you're playing those cards. You can play things like decks that go wildly over the top, like Tron, and be just fine, I think. But for now, I've been experimenting with some different things. I've tried. I had played a mono black aggro deck that was very successful. I had a 4-1 the other day with it. If that's some content you'd be interested in, I can publish that content. I can publish content from other formats as well. However, this channel, from the outset, the plan has been primarily to stay 8-rack content. And maybe if there's a Urza's Saga mid-range deck, like there's a black-green Saga deck that I've been experimenting with. I might try an Abzan Saga deck or maybe Abzan Aluris one day. If those are stuff that would interest you, let me know in the comments. But for now, the only time I'm going to publish content on this specific channel is 8-rack unless someone tells me otherwise, that they want different content or more various content. That being said, I'm going to do a quick little synopsis of this. We're going to do like we did a few videos back where I had my microphone off during the league because while I'm at work and things, I tend to keep my microphone and my sound off all the time. So it's very easy for me to, when I record a league, to leave my microphone off. I apologize for that. But this is what we're working with. The only real differences are collective brutalities and sudden edicts in the sideboard. I think both of those are very good right now. Burn is on the uptick because Burn happens to beat specifically Hammer Time and the Ragavan mid-range decks a large amount of the time. So it's very good right now. It won a modern challenge, I believe, recently, and top 8, or they might have had 2 or 3 decks total in the top 8 of that challenge. I'm not entirely sure. But Burn is very well positioned. It's always just going to, when the format gets a little bit too fair, burn kind of brings it back down to earth. It beats up on the decks that are able to generate value over a long game and not necessarily want to race you, and has a good sideboard plan against decks like Living In and Hammer Time and things like that. So Collective Brutality important for burn. Sudden Edict is just a card that it's a regular edict except it has split second, so it gives you a little bit more help against Murktide Regent. They can't play Murktide, pass with a counterspell held up on turn 4. So a little bit of tech against there. Dothy Voidwalker, same type of thing. Like I said, I went down to 2 Shrieking Afflictions, and you'll watch some of the gameplay this league, and you'll notice that there was one game in particular where if the Shrieking Afflictions had just been removal spells or any interaction spells, I probably would have won the game. The dynamic with Saga now has made the deck have to be so skewed to it that unless you're running a kind of just a good old pod racing version where you're running primarily only the like you're running your wrench mines and stuff and things like that, where like you're running the heavy on the discard side of the deck, which is a usually a good way to play the deck. It's a very valid way to play the deck. I think you probably want 3 to 4 Shrieking Afflictions still. Right now, because of how skewed the meta is, Shrieking Affliction is not good if you're trying to interact really well. And if it's a meta where you have to interact, and there's so many high density 1 mana and 2 mana creatures that if you just don't kill them immediately, they run away with the game. I think that you need more removal spells. I'm going to experiment with Funeral Charms maybe as Blood Chief's Thirst, but the fact that Ragavan has Dash is just so brutal against our sorcery speed removal that I've not had the heart to take it out. But I'm going to skip forward a little bit, and we'll get some gameplay in. So this is match 1, and we'll play this one first, so you get to see Rack doing its thing. Pretty much I was pretty reluctant to keep this hand. I think I ended up mulliganing it. Yep. This was, and I was kind of upset about this hand too because I thought the previous hand was better. We'll talk about that for a second. In the blind, it's hard to tell exactly, if a deck is worth playing, or excuse me, if like Nile Spellbomb and things like that are worth running against the deck. The Raven's Crime definitely smoothed the hand out quite a bit, though. This is the Temur Reclamation deck that we're playing against. And we go 2-0 against them. We handle them pretty well. I don't think the Temur Reclamation deck is a... I know that there's a very popular streamer named Aspiring Spike that's played it recently. And when he plays a deck, that other people tend to pick it up very aggressively. And this is me checking right here, of course, just to give you a quick synopsis of what's happening. This is me checking to see if it's... At this point, I still don't know if it's Temur Reclamation or Footfalls. And so instead of just playing slowly and grinding some value, I just go ahead and aggressively snap off this Thoughtseize. I believe it gets counterspelled, but as soon as I see that counterspell, I immediately know that it's Temur Reclamation, though, because the Crashing Footfalls deck and Living In, neither one can afford to play counterspell in their deck because their deck wouldn't work if they ran a 2-drop. Or at least a real 2-drop. So we know that we're in the clear to just start firing off Raven's Crimes blindly. When you're unsure if it's Living In, you don't really want to Raven's Crime them because you don't want to accelerate them. But just getting back to what I was saying, I think people will pick up decks like this because a streamer who's a very good Magic player will have good success with it because he can kind of sometimes overcome the shortcomings of the deck itself. But I don't think this deck in particular is particularly powerful in the meta. It does attempt to go over the top of the Ragavan type decks, but we're not exactly a tier 1 deck ourselves, and we handle them extremely well. I believe they tap out to play Reclamation here. There's a couple interesting interactions. We 2-0 this deck pretty easily, to give spoilers, because it's like I said, it's just their interaction and their game plan just doesn't line up great with what we're doing. Here I kind of lament a little bit in a minute about having this double smallpox. I believe that they just make a shark here, which at first didn't make much sense to me because of how the board shaped up. I'm like, well, our saga tokens will be bigger than that shark, just just by making saga tokens. But I believe, yeah. Let's see here. Our opponent's going to, I think, the Archmage's Charm to keep from taking the 2 damage. I think that they just didn't know that they had a second. They have a second Shark Typhoon spoiler here. This is the part that I get like a little bit like, oh man, when they cast the second one. We'll go ahead and fast forward just a little bit. We'll skip forward 30 seconds so you can see the second Shark Typhoon. Kind of a nice thing to do when you're not playing instantly here is that you could just skip all of our opponents fumbling around with mana and us doing the same, like thinking about mulligans and things like that. But drawing that Fatal Push instantly, I was like, oh, we don't have to. I was kind of upset thinking, oh, I'm going to have to double Smallpox here instead of get my value. But as soon as I drew that Fatal Push, I knew, I was like, okay, now we have a legit chance to run away with this game. I think I consider for a moment getting a Pithing Needle for Wrenn 6, because it is a Planeswalker that notoriously goes in these Wilderness Reclamation decks because they want to just kind of value you out over the game, eventually have like an insane amount of mana at their end step each turn. I think Modern's power level is too far gone for a deck like theirs to do very well in the environment. Removal is just too good. The creatures are just too good. I think blue-white control is probably the only like true control deck, like in the variants of it, like Jeskai and things like that, that you really want to be playing in the meta. And here's the part where I kind of didn't understand making the 3/3 shark, because it's not going to be able to cleanly block any of our creatures now. When you could have just waited a turn, because the saga was on the battlefield. But we don't know the contents of their hand. It might have been 2 lands and a Shark Typhoon. It might have just been a, let's get some value off drawing a card here. Hard to tell. Don't like to criticize my opponents for their decisions ever, because I don't see their hand when I play. But I know that knowing how my deck functions, I probably would have played against that a little bit differently. Here we've kind of got them in a bit of a vice because I think that they choose to block and bolt here. And from the looks of it, it doesn't look like that they're running Unholy Heat in their deck. Yep, and here I just decided to Raven's Crime instead of smallpoxing twice, which is an option, but yeah, I even point to the smallpox like, well, I could smallpox, but what would have happened is they would have just bolted my construct in response to that, and then I lose my second smallpox, and it just wouldn't have been a great outcome. Double smallpoxing plays around less is the problem. It was the way to win the game that turn. But if they have Archmage's Charm to draw 2 or anything like that, we're in a bind. But as you can see, you pretty easily get game 1. I'll speed through sideboarding here. Really the only notable thing, I believe we take out a Smallpox, a Swamp, the Funeral Charms, and basically bring in just the Voidwalkers, just to get a little added pressure. I end up reluctantly keeping this hand, and if you want to take a quick look at it here, I'm not sure why my bar here won't go away. It's supposed to naturally come off the screen. Okay. But the reason why I keep this hand is because I know that my rack effects are not particularly good against their deck. They have the ability to, and actually right here, I even think, I even just say I'm going to play around Veil of Summer. I play the Pithing Needle to try to make them crack their fetch land. They just decide they're not going to crack the fetch land. That instance right there probably cost them the game, because they're choked on mana now for the rest of the game until it's too late for it to matter. We top deck and we get to play the Voidwalker here. But our curve ends up being pretty good because we know that we're going to have very large and very aggressive Saga tokens. Uh, you'll see once again, this is one of the first examples of how the Shrieking Affliction will look like a dead card almost this entire game. So now the tap lands they're really stuck on too bad, and I'm definitely making sure that my viewers are aware of that. Like I said, I was talking, I didn't realize my mic was off while I was filming this. But we play that out, we crime them, we kind of know a Veil's coming, but there's just no way that they would have kept that hand if it wasn't. But you'll see here that the reason why I don't think that deck is particularly great is because even through 2 Veil of Summers, they have a second coming soon. That don't believe the deck is very, very well attuned to dealing with decks that are doing relatively fair things. I mean, we're not doing anything super powerful. We're just making it. We got an unblockable 3/2 and some. So this engineered explosives slows us down a bit. But I remember specifically thinking, I think they have a second Veil here as well. I remember specifically thinking, like, well, hopefully they learned their lesson about not waiting too long on the pithing needle, and they do. We'll skip forward just a little bit more. It's just simply them tapping out while we make our Saga tokens. Nothing too exciting going on. We've got 2 Saga tokens. Okay, now they have to crack that in response. But this example of just a good game. This is what modern, in my opinion, should be like. For modern to be a fun format, I think that decks like Wilderness Reclamation need to be able to be playable, and this is the type of format that I would like to see more often. Here is just an easy Fatal Push. You just get rid of the Snapcaster, even though it's just coming in as a chump blocker. They were able to get rid of the Pithing Needle there with their engineered explosives, but at this point it's board wipe or bust. They have 6 cards in hand, so I know my rack effects aren't going to be good. Then once again, that's why I say like the Shrieking Affliction plays against the backup plan a little too much. So that's maybe a problem that the deck has had for a long time, but I'm not entirely sure if it really is or not. I think maybe because of the way that I played the deck with Saga, it might be more pronounced than other ones because I've tried to up the quality of cards I play. So now I'm just thinking like, okay, I could Snapcaster, steal his Snapcaster with my Voidwalker and Thoughtseize him. I then just decide it's probably better to just get in for 4 damage, or the 3 extra potential damage, and make him have to have multiple ways of interacting instead of just one way of interacting. So just simply getting in with some Saga tokens, the Voidwalker. I believe it's just a removal spell here, so an Ancient Grudge. But thankfully, Voidwalker, the passive Graveyard Hate, does its job. And all I do simply here is fire the factory up so that it's 6. And I have the Fatal Push in case they want to play a Snapcaster Mage for no value again, as just a Ambush Viper. So there's a gameplay, of us getting a pretty handed win. Like we were, winning pretty handedly. The deck is still very playable, so when I say these things, like I don't want you to think that I'm dismissing the deck. We'll skip forward in time a little bit here. And this is kind of the matchup, the first one, where I really, to me, it was a lot of evidence as to some of the issues I've been having. And maybe you all as the viewers can kind of help me out a little bit with the best way to build a deck list that can handle these types of spots. This is just going to be a Grixis Death Shadow list, and historically speaking, Grixis Death Shadow is nearly a free win for us. With the introduction of Ragavan and dress down to deal with our own Saga tokens, it's not exactly been a free win. At least not in the way that it used to be. As you said, we actually go 0-2 this matchup. And it's like we can watch through here. We take the Kolaghan's Command. That's a pretty easy take on our end. We'll fast forward just a bit here. Kind of give you an idea. It's just nothing really of any importance happens for the first like 6 turns of the game, really. They get their Lurrus back to hand, I believe. I guess they had already done that and cast it there. I remember commenting and saying, you know, we can live through one bauble trigger here. That's not a big deal. Our opponent does have knowledge at the top of our library at this point. So almost certainly will be smallpoxing on this turn, depending on what we draw, of course. Looking back now, instead of smallpoxing here, I could have expedition mapped for a Castle Locthwain and get the castle, play the castle because of Revolt, and then play that. But here I'm thinking like, well, I'm not going to be able to get their hand low enough because I have to run all these 1-mana interactive spells for all these 1-mana creatures that they're playing. But we're not in too rough of shape. I think I want to go back and just experimenting with more of the prison-y style of the deck. And you all just tell me what you think of that as well. Yeah, I'll almost skip through the turn here without just going ahead and making my land drop for turn. But we feel in like a really good position here. And this is the part of the game that I felt really confident. We'll fast forward just a little bit. But here's the issue. So I dashed Ragavan now. We do have a Fatal Push. But I do know that they find a way to play around this Fatal Push. And this dashed Ragavan will carry them from this point of the game for the entirety of the game. They play the Liliana of the Veil. It doesn't actually matter. It's just them saving, because they're not going to tick it up. It's just them saving edicts for later. I end up, so this play doesn't look like it makes any sense in the context. We know that they have a dress down in hand, meaning that at any point they want to, they can just kill all our Saga tokens and draw a card from it. So any point where it's worth it for us, mana-wise, to not make a Saga token, like if we have 3 mana that we could use for something else, this is the part that kind of ends the game right here. They have the ability to Inquisition my instant speed removal spell, and they dash the Ragavan, and that's just what happens the rest of the game. Is just we can't kill the Ragavan because of the dash ability, and it's a little bit of saltiness for me to know that like it's the dash on that card doesn't actually make that card any more playable, and that it would still be the best 1-drop in the format. I think I just go ahead and make a Saga token here. I don't remember. I believe I do, because that seems like the most appropriate play still. There isn't a lot going on, so I end up just getting a rack because Spellbomb doesn't really help me. I've already killed their Lurrus. But here you see, you know, we do lose our creature here, and because we didn't get the Nile Spellbomb, if we had gotten the Nile Spellbomb, we could have saved it. But they're really by tapping and giving itself that. But there's really no way to know that that's the situation that's going to play out. They are at 6 life here, mind you, so I was okay at this point with them taking some, you know, getting rid of some cards out of their hand. That's why like them getting Liliana wasn't very frustrating, but the combination of them just getting to hold their cards at hand while playing my cards with Ragavan, it's kind of put the deck naturally in a weird position where this matchup that should be a good matchup, like when it plays out, these long games, has consistently been a pretty rough matchup. Like to the point that it's been a while since I've done better than 3-2 while playing the rack. And they are able to get our last card out of our hand just by playing our deck from Ragavan. So it creates an interesting game dynamic. There's not. This is another point where I'm lamenting, Shrieking Affliction, as like had it been a interactive spell, we would have been in a lot better shape here. Like had it been a hand disruption spell, had it been a removal spell, anything of that sort, we'd be in a little bit of a better spot because we wouldn't just die to this Ragavan. And you'll see, we'll skip ahead 30 more seconds. There's a second one after the Ragavan has got in, and it's just we got both of them, and they just did nothing. The rack is very good because it gets hit off the Saga still, but because of the way that the format is warped, because of Ragavan, this card is worse than it should be. Like, it should be fine, but it's just this card and Hammer Time with Esper Sentinel and Pure Steel Paladin. It's made it really hard to try to do the primary rack thing. So if you guys want to see me trying to fumble around and play some mid-rangey decks too, I'll do that for you all. But that's just an example. This game, Ragavan just wins the game. I won't make you sit through it. I'm down to 2 here. Same thing. They just double bolt me at the end. Sideboarding, not a whole lot. This is, in my opinion, probably it's like the Grixis Death Shadow deck. I think it's actually the most powerful deck in Modern right now. I think that it's a very, very difficult deck to play at a very high level when you're playing against other good players. So I don't think that you see it as often until you get to that very elite talent level of Magic that you'll start seeing guys play that and do well with it. I don't know who our opponent is. He seemed like he played the deck fine. Don't know if he's accomplished or not or anything. Not saying that our opponent was like it was playing against Reed Duke or anything like that. It just was the deck. He just played it well, and the deck just, when it's played properly, looks very good. I brought in a couple of Voidwalkers and a few other things. I do end up, I believe, taking. Take the draw. Anytime that they don't have green and they're playing these Ragavan type decks, I tend to just go ahead and take the draw because you have to have the turn 1 removal spell no matter what. It gives you an extra draw to get the removal spell, and it gives you an extra card for the grindy parts of the game. We'll skip forward a little bit here. The hand we end up keeping is just one we know that we're very, very, very happy to see a Dragon Rage Chandler instead of a Ragavan in this spot. I believe we just play our rack out, and now we know we have the ability to play our Sudden Edict to kill their creature. We'll skip forward a little bit more. And Sudden Edict, coincidentally, is decent against Dragon Rage Chandler too, so they can't last second cast a couple spells and get some extra value off of it. Because it does have the split second. And this is just once again another position where it actually looks like we're doing all right. They are unable. They bring their Lurrus to hand, but they're unable to cast it. But once again, as you'll see here, hasty dashed Ragavan. We do have the Funeral Charm this time. But they do tip their hand that they have a removal spell by attacking into that Mishra's Factory. So we know that they either have a Bolt or an Unholy Heat. That's what I'm speaking about there. At this moment, they don't have the ability to play their Lurrus and get their Ragavan back. But even if they do, they'll have to just do it for 1 mana next turn, so it's not dashed. Not a whole lot happens here. It's just you kind of know what goes on. We Edict. We end up pitching the Voidwalker here, and this is a situation where I thought really hard about that at the time. And we'll look at the film here and see if that would have changed the outcome. But my thought process was that the graveyard now matters less because we've taken care of their Lurrus. But I think they maybe Kolaghan's Command here and blow up basically my 2 threats. And that was a pretty big shift in the game from that point on. I didn't really recover. I did not understand, however, our opponent not bringing back at least their Lurrus from the graveyard to their hand. But there was the removal spell that they tipped their hand on. We ended up taking I think the Drown in the Luck over the Inquisition. I don't remember for sure. Either one of those is fine to take in that situation. The Drown is a little bit more flexible. That's the reason why I took it. They end up just Inquisitioning, of course, and taking our other threat in Liliana. So it ends up working out well for them, but could have very easily been punished by not getting a creature that turn. Because we know there's an Unholy Heat, we can't really attack with our Mishra's Factory. And we don't have any racks in place. There's no incentive to get that card out of their hand for more damage. But now we get in this weird situation once again. You'll see a dashed Ragavan here. And we're stonewalled by this Ragavan plus a protection spell or removal spell. And once again, this card just runs away with the game against us. 2 in a row. And we'll skip forward. Like, there's not really much to see here, but I know that I'm trying to just get rid of some of their lands, some of their instant speed interaction, hoping maybe that they ditch that Unholy Heat. At this point, it's just Unholy Heat and Ragavan in hand. And now you'll see the monkey just run away with the game once again. And it really is just the dashed part of the card is what makes it a little bit unfair. Like I said, I know it looks like I could just block with the Mishra's Factory and buff it, but we do have a known removal spell in our opponent's hand. And they just keep generating mana, so our mana reduction plan was not very effective against them. So we just go ahead and cash in our land to draw to try to find any interaction against them. I remember casting this Pithing Needle, hoping our opponent thought that we could get rid of their treasure and sack their treasures in response to it or counter it or something. We end up naming Bauble, which ends up being in their hand. But we do finally have the Fatal Push, and you'll see what happens here as I skip forward 30 seconds as I'm trying to decide what to name exactly. You'll see we have the Fatal Push, but now they've generated so much mana. They have answers, and they've been able to cast our spells instead of casting their spells to not have to worry about the rack. Of course, something to keep in mind is you always let Ragavan go to combat before you remove it. If you do it in the main phase, they can just cast a second one if they have it. But this is another pretty tilting point where it's like they've got the treasures off Ragavan, so another additional part of Ragavan, and now they were able to counter the spell to protect it. So now they have a removal spell, take care of a blocker, they have the mana for the counter spell, and now they'll have the mana for the removal spell again. And it generates probably for modern, probably more value than Deathrite Shaman even generated, which is kind of insane to think, but it just I've not seen a deck or a card just get a deck so far ahead so often. And I don't know if Ragavan will be banned. I think they'll probably try to ban Bauble or Lurrus first. But this is just kind of a video talking about, the reason why you're seeing less content from me is because this exact sequence of gameplay is very unfun to be on the receiving end of. And we'll skip forward. Like we're just not going to be able to beat this card. We end up, or excuse me, they end up. We know that they have 2 threats in hand, and that's the game for that game. I'm going to fast forward here. We played against a little bit of a jankier, or excuse me, this deck was actually really awesome. This was a mono black Eldrazi deck, which I talked to the creator of it a little bit. It actually looked really sweet. This Scrap Heap Scrounger actually just beat us to death. I played it a lot in Pioneer. It's a very fun card, very powerful against removal heavy decks. Like you can't really get rid of them. The deck is very resilient, very tough. We get pounded by it pretty hard, actually. Well, I shouldn't say that. Both games we lost were very close, but specifically the Scrounger just dominated the battlefield by constantly being a threat to come back, putting us in positions where we always had to chump block. So that does look really neat. It might be something I try out myself. And if it's something you'd be interested in seeing on the channel, let me know. If not, there's really not a whole lot to see in this gameplay series. The other league, I'll try to post the whole league. But this is more of kind of just a PSA of why you're getting less content from me. We're just going to fast forward this whole gameplay. Like I said, this is actually, there's not a whole lot to see. Just losing to that card quite a bit. This one ended up being very long. The Thought Not Seer ended up taking it home for them. So at this point, we're 1-2. This was a rough league. We can go through the. Our opponent was playing a very, 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 very spicy, I guess would be the appropriate name for the deck, or the term for the deck. This one's really, for learning 8-rack, this is not worth watching, in my opinion. It's entertaining in the sense that, you get to see what they're doing. We handled their deck pretty well. But I've never seen a deck that has both Arrayo, Mox Amber, Ragavan, but also running Esper Sentinel and Welding Jar and Insole Artifact and Narset and Days Undoing combo all in the same deck. It is absolutely a trip to watch. And I don't think the deck ever actually came together. We ended up dying game 2 to a Insole Artifact on a Welding Jar, dealing 15-16 to us. And we couldn't come back from that. But game 1 and game 3, there was no issue with the deck. At this point, we just assumed that it's a Izzet Delver deck. When you see Scalding Tarn into Ragavan, you just think that they mulligan to 5. Then this Spire of Industry that's getting ready to get played really threw me for a loop. Because that's not a card that you see in a fair Ragavan deck ever. And here's once again the dash was a little bit annoying, but Ragavan hitting you once doesn't necessarily kill you, but I really didn't understand them not casting the rack here. I guess because they didn't want to lose their treasure token in case they needed it later, but I would have done it if I was my opponent. I would have just said, that's the game we're playing. We're going to play it. Because obviously they had artifact synergies anyway. But we'll fast forward a bit. Like I said, this one's not a particularly interesting matchup. They had an engineered explosive game 1 that they top decked main deck, and they took here's the Days Undoing they're talking about, like being shocked that those cards are all in the same deck. It was not, like I said, nothing particularly interesting here as to what was going on. The engineered explosives, though, made the game last instead of a few turns. It made the game last about, like, the game was pretty much over. We had 2 rack effects in play. Now it makes the game last, I don't know, I guess at least 11, 12 turns. So we do finally get both rack effects, and then that's the end of that game. This is the game we lose to the Welding Jar. Just kidding. The Welding Jar is not enough what actually deals lethal to us, but we do lose the game. They have insult. This is all the same deck. That's what I'm saying. This is so insane. These cards in play are the same cards that were like the same deck of the like Steam Vents into Ragavan, into Arrayo and stuff like that. So I have no clue what into Days Undoing and Narset. We thought Seas, there are Teferis, and there's Ornithopters. I don't know how they fit that many things in the number of cards that they managed to fit it in, but they did. We did lose game 2. Game 3 was pretty easy. We just kind of dismantled them. It's not really the point of this video. I can post the whole league, but it will be without sound if people really want to watch content that much. But that's where we're at. But just we were 2-2 at that point, and once again we just lose to we beat Jund game 1. We'll play this game out. We make a pretty intelligent play here, I would say, and instead of trying to make a Saga token and block, we have this Dismember, and we know that the racks will deal lethal over 2 turns to our opponent. So we're at 15, and they have a 3/3, a 3/3, and a 6/7. And there is already an instant in the graveyard. I'll pause it right here, and I'll ask, what would you do in this situation with this Dismember? Would you cast it and take the 2? Would you wait? Well, I decided to cast it on a Dragon Ridge Channeler. And the only reason why I decided to at the last minute was because, specifically, I was like, well, it deals 1 less damage to me. And they have 1 card left in hand. The other option, knowing that we can win the game, would be to dismember the Tarmogoyf. And even though it doesn't kill us, or like even though we don't kill the Tarmogoyf, gives it -5, -5. You only take 2 damage, so you basically save a bolt's worth of life. I take the play that saves us 2 damage instead of 3 damage, or excuse me, 1 damage instead of 3 damage, because it doesn't quite leave us in bolt range. And it is neat to show our opponent shows us at the end of this game here when we tick up our Liliana to kill them. Because I was kind of struggling to think about which one. I was talking about probably here. Like, I probably should have fogged the Tarmogoyf. But we're at 4 at this point. And the last card in our opponent's hand is a Bolt. In their mind, I think they're thinking, oh, well, we don't know how many racks they have. We could just bolt them. But don't even worry about making a Saga token here because the racks are lethal on their own. Things like Maelstrom Pulse are not an instant speed, thankfully. And even though it's an abrupt decay, we still win the game from this point. But opponent shows us here. They go ahead and bolt us. And had we not played it out that way, we would have lost the game. So it's important. Always keep your life total in mind. This is the Jund deck. And it was a pretty good deck. But once again, I believe it's game 2 here, or 3. That we end up... well, there's not a whole lot else to see in this part. I might cut this out of editing too. But just to give you an idea of what the modern meta is like. A little bit of fast-forwarded gameplay video. I know this isn't exactly the most entertaining thing in the world compared to just streaming live, so I apologize that I was not able to do that, but this is the part that I wanted to get to. Was we basically had the game locked, or we didn't have the game locked up. We were doing pretty well up to the point that they could start dashing that Ragavan, and we didn't have a way to get rid of it. They top-decked it, and it just was, once again, that's kind of the card we lost to, so I'm going to pause it from here. We end up really losing because we didn't really have a third land for several turns. I think we end up taking the Ragavan there instead of the Wrenn and 6. Just knowing, that we had the instant speed removal, they could easily cast Thoughtseize and just dash it again. And we end up playing the rack here, but we end up losing. This is just a 2-3 league. It's not worth posting the whole league on YouTube, I don't think, especially since the audio was messed up. This is the audio we're doing it, but I wanted to give you guys an update as to why you're seeing a little bit less modern content from me. I feel like the qualities of gameplay in Modern's gone down a bit because of those 2 cards. Specifically for playing 8-rack, the games are just not very interesting anymore. Playing at my local LGS and playing at large events where there's a high meta diversity, I still greatly enjoy it, and I greatly recommend the deck. It's even not unplayable with this type of meta that's happening at this point. Like, it's still a playable deck. It's still perfectly fine. But it's definitely lost a lot of its potency because you have to lean into dealing with the 20% of the format a little bit too heavy. But just giving you an idea, that's kind of what's going on with Magic right now for me. Kind of what's going on in Modern for me. If you guys want to see other gameplay videos, I can certainly make them. But for now, this channel is dedicated to specifically 8-rack content. So here's just a quick update on the rack. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have fun watching. And I will catch you guys soon. You can watch them swing for lethal if you like, I guess. There's only 5 minutes left of the video. We know we're pretty much dead at this point, but there's really not much point in continuing showing the gameplay footage. There wasn't any misplays or anything like that I'm trying to hide from you or anything. It just got our face beat in. But that's what happened there. So that's kind of, I was just going to post the whole league, but like I said, the audio is messed up. So this is what I have to work with. I apologize for that, guys, and I hope you continue to enjoy it. Keep racking for me, keep winning for me. I'm here with you. I'll be playing leagues at least every couple of weeks with the deck, and hopefully hopefully Ragavan catches a ban soon, so I'm excited enough to play leagues 2 and 3 times or 4 times a week again. That's what I'm hoping that happens to the modern format. Until that happens, though, I'll still be doing 8-rat content. It's just a little bit more spaced out. Thank you guys. You're awesome. I will catch you in my next video, though.